Om Stapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmaswarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namah Sudhismriti purananam alayam karunalayam namami bhagavat padam Shankaram lokashankaram. We are now continuing our discussion on this Adhikarana, Anandamaya Adhikaranam, which is very, very important and slightly complicated. So Anandamaya Abhyasat, that's it. Is a very important and very often misunderstood. There is a lot of subtleties about it. So, beginning. As a prelude to that, you can find some very important observations before the Vayasika Nyayamala is introduced. So you can look at the text. Unless you closely follow the text, here we may not be able to make the meaning. Okay, you can read again and then with the help of translation you can try to understand better. So, evam sadhyo mukti karanamapi atmajnanam ubadhi visheshadvarena upadishyamanamapi avikshito ubadhi sambandha vishesham parapara vishayatvena sandihyamanam vakyagati paryalochanaya nirnayitavyam. So, Atmajnanam leads to Sadhyo Mukti, that is Jivan Mukti. But the Upadesha is given with some Ubadhi connection. This Ubadhi Sambandha is not the main theme of the Adhikarana. And that is not what is supposed to be emphasized. So Bhashyakara mentions that there are references to Parabrahmam and also Aparabrahmam. That is Nirubadhika Parabrahmam and Sopadhika Aparabrahmam. So we may have some doubts. So how to address those conflicts and doubts? This is the early introduction. Evam sadhya mukti karanam. So, this atmajnanam, it leads to sadhya mukti. Here we should remember, whenever there is saguna, sopadhika, aparabrahman is mentioned, it is upasya, upasana, meditation, dhyana, etc. Whenever there is nirguna, nirakara, nirubadhika of Parabrahman is mentioned, it is jnaya. So once you really understand, then you don't have to do anything else. But when a way of meditation is introduced, then it is obligatory that you have to do some karma, upasana, dhyanam, etc. That's why it was mentioned earlier that upasya is always, saguna is always upasya, nirguna is, or nirubadhika is always jnaya. It's already mentioned earlier. Ubadhi visheshadvarena upadishyamanamapi. Na avivakshito ubadhi sambandha vishesham parapara vishetvena sandihyamanam. So, there is a reference to Parabrahmam and also Aparabrahmam, the Nirupadhika and also the Sopadhika, the Nirguna and also Saguna. So how do we come to the real conclusion as the real purport, the theme of those Vedanta Vakyas? Vakya Gadi Paryalochanaya. Vakya Tatparyam, Shadvidha Talperi Lingam, that is Upakrama Vasamkhara Abhyasa Purvada Phalam Arthavadu Uvotija Lingam Talperi Nirnaye. These are all used by Mimamsakas, and I think I already mentioned many times. You can also find in the Chandogya Tattwamasi also, Tattwamasi Mahavakya Vichara also. All these are very relevant. So I won't repeat that again because that's something you already listened to from me and I have discussed earlier. So Vakya Gati Paryalochana means you have to think as to the meaning, the purport of Vedanta Vakyas based on Vakya Gati, where the Vakyas converge with regard to one central theme, central thesis. Nirnetavyam, to be decided, Bhavati. So what is the doubt? The doubt is whether it is Upasya, Saguna, or whether it is Jnaya or Nirguna. Whether it is Sopadhika, Brahman, which leads to Upasana, which may bring you Abhyudaya, and which eventually may take you to Krama Mukti, going through different lokas. These are all very well supposed to be understood for students of Brahma Sutras. So if you elaborately describe every minute point, we may miss certain very important ideas which are only mentioned in the Brahma Sutra. So I will skip certain things which are very obvious and are explicit for any student of Upanishads. So you can find out. So Nirubadhya means Jnanam, and that is Tattva Jnanam that leads to Sadhya Mukti. Sadhya Mukti is actually the absolute, the ultimate purpose. But sometimes this Brahman is sometimes described as Sopadhika, Apara, or Nirubadhika as Parabrahman. So in that case, you will have some doubts. So Bhashyakara continues, Yathaiva Tavad Anandamaya Abhyasaditi. Anandamaya Abhyasa, Anandamaya Adhikaranam is a very, very subtle Adhikaranam. You know, every Adhikaranam has got an Adhikarana Vakyam. Just like Ikshati Adhikaranam, Saikshada, Saiksham Chakre, etc. The one he did Sankalpa. Who did Sankalpa? Pradhanam or Ishvara. That is with regard to Jagat Karanam, which is not directly connected here. Like that, the Anandamaya Adhikaranam also has got one important Adhikarana Vakyam. Adhikarana Vakyam is Brahma Pucham Pradishtha. And that is emphasized only by Shankaracharya. You know why it mentioned here? In the discussion, you come across certain arguments put forward by a great pre-Shankarite writer and Vedantin. He was either, it could be Upavarsha, but most scholars agree it was Bodhayana, whose vritti, Krita Kodi, was the original source of Ramanuja's Visishtadvaita, Chit Achit Visishta Sankalpa. So according to this Bodhayana, who also wrote a vritti on this, because very important, Bodhayana's views are very elaborately discussed and analyzed as a prelude before Shankaracharya puts forward his Advaitic view. You have to remember, what is the context? The context is this. Tasmat va edasmat vijnanamayat anyondara atma anandamayaha tenaisha purnaka savaesha purusha vida eva tasya purusha vidadham anyayam purusha vidaka tasya priyameva siraka modu dakshina pakshaka pramoda uttara pakshaka ananda atma brahma pucham pradishtha tadapesha sloko bhavati. The problem is Vrittikara. So I will be mentioning Vrittikara. Vrittikara refers to Bodhayana, who is the author of the Vritti, is called Krita Koti. The book is not available. It is not yet fully discovered. Whatever sometimes people claim, but not fully accepted as authentic. According to Vrittikara, Anandamaya itself is Ishvara. So Para-Atma, that's what he mentioned here. So there is a traditional way of condensing or summarizing the views of Bodhayana. It is something like this. Anandamaya Paramatma. Paramatma here means Saguna Sagara Sabhisesha Ishvara. At the same time, you have to remember, Shankara tells you that Anandamaya is really, ultimately, it is Brahman, who is a Pradishtha, Asraya, Adhishthanam of Anandamaya. So, Anandamaya itself is not Paramatma, rather the Pradishtha, Adhishthanam, Asraya, or it's called Pucham. Pucham here means, Pucham. Maybe the scholars will tell you a bird cannot really navigate distances without the help of his Pucham tail. That's what it helps you. That is the Adhishthanam, the Asraya, the sustaining factor. Maybe from that this word must have been used. But Pucham here means Asraya and Adhisthana. So Shankara will tell you that Anandamaya itself is not Paramatma as Brahman, but it is okay, Anandamaya is Ishvara, the Saguna Sakara Ishvara, but the ultimate reality is Brahman, which is the Pradishtha Brahma, Pucham Pradishtha. That word is not properly analyzed by Vrittikara. Vrittikara doesn't come up to that. Vrittikara stops with the list statement, that is Pramod Uttara Pakshaka, Ananda Atma. Up to that only Vrittikara comes. Shankaracharya enters the scene much later. So the first portion of the Bhashya is an exchange of views between Vrittikara, Bodhayana, and those who opposed him, who frequently argues that Anandamaya is samsari jiva, and Bodhayana opposes that. So Vrittikara, this Bodhayana, he establishes that Anandamaya is Paramatma. Paramatma here means Ishvara. That is the foundation of Ramanujacharya's Sagala Guna Kalyana Nidhi, because Vrittikara interprets the Mayat Pratyaya, which is attached to Ananda, in terms of abundance. That is, Mayat Pratyaya can be interpreted in terms of Vikarartha, that is modification, or in terms of Prachuryartha, abundance, complete. So, you get Ananda from this Ishvara, who has an abundance of this Prachuryam of this Ananda. So, Anandamaya Paramatma, Kutaha, this is a condensation of Vrittikara Matam. That is called Ekadesinam Matam. It is called. Ekadesi means a view which is partly correct, not entirely. The Ekadesi Matam is frequently used in many contexts here. It comes very close to Advaita, but still it is different from Advaita. Anandamaya Paramatma, that is Saguna Sakara Ishvara, Sagala Guna Kalyana Nidhi of Ramanuja, who wrote this Bhashyam according to tradition, based on Bodhayana Vritti, called Kritakodi. The book is not yet available, at least not the well-established authentic sources not available. Kutaka Abhyasad, because there is a lot of repetition of this Ananda. I mentioned this, Tenaisha Purnaka, Savesha Purushaka, then Tasya Priyameva Shiraka, Modu Dakshina Pakshaka, Pramoda Uttara Pakshaka, etc. So, a lot of time this Anandamaya is used here. Why? Because when you look at the Taittiriya text, it is interpreted in its own distinct manner by Shankara. So, for example, the Atma or Antaratma of Annamaya Kosha is Pranamaya Kosha. That is called Sharira Atma. Sharira means Sharira Sambandhi, which is distinct from Sharira, but linked to, connected to Sharira, what is within. So Annamayasya Sharira Atma is Pranamaya Kosha. Pranamayasya Atma, what is that? Manomaya Kosha. Manomayasya Atma, the Antaratamaha is called, the inner entity, is Manomayasya Atma. Shariri is Vijnanamaya Kosha. Vijnanamayasya Atma is Anandamaya Kosha. See, Tasya Purnasya Vijnanamayasya Esha Eva Sharira Atma. That is Anandamaya Kosha. And Vrittigara stops here. It doesn't go further. Where Vrittigara stops, Shankaracharya enters the scene. So why now I am making all these earlier observations? Because it is going to be very somewhat elaborate. Those who are not familiar with the text, and those who have only studied or chanting, may not get any idea of the philosophical Advaitic interpretation. Where Shankaracharya enters the scene only after the 19th sutra is established, that is Asminnasya cha tad yogam shasti, that is 19th sutra, where Bodhayana completes all his observations. All Shankaracharya's summarization or condensation of Bodhayana Matam is completed. Then Bhashyakara enters the scene with the statement, Idam tu iha vaktavyam. Here, I want to make a few important observations. So then he starts saying that now you have to extend beyond the Anandamaya Kosha, Brahma Bhashyam Pradishtha. That also should be taken into consideration. So that is the real Anandamaya. That is the Asraya Pradishtha for Anandamaya is Brahman. Brahman is the basis of everything, the Asraya of even Anandamaya Kosha. This is an important point, remember. Now, in course of time, we will understand this. So, again, I am coming to this condensation because that is very important, very crucial to understand the trend of thinking. Because since it's an online course, there are not examinations, so I want you to grasp the entire background of this. So if you read Sri Bhashya's own analysis, you can find that the entire background was prepared by Bodhayana. Etam anantamayam atmanam upasankramadi ityadina anantamayaha abhyasyate. Abhyasyate means, abhyasa means, Upakrama Upasamkhara Abhyasa, the third Talparyalinga means repetition. Arabhyade Abhyasascha Talparyalingam Tatparyam cha Vedantanam Brahmani eva iti avochama. That is correct. What Brahman? Saguna Sagara Sabhisesha Ishvara. That is the Paratma or Paramatma of Vrittigara. Same as Ramanuja. Kimcha Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma idi Brahma Upakramad idam sarvam asrujata idi sarvasishtuadibhyascha Anandamayo Brahma. So what is the Anandamaya is Brahman according to Vrittigara, according to Shankara. The Pradishtha or Asraya of Anandamaya is Brahman. That is, it. Bhashyakara agrees with many of the teachings, ideas of Vrittigara, but he goes beyond that. Vrittigara doesn't come to Brahma Bhashyam Pradishtha. In Sri Vaishnava philosophy, it has got a different meaning, which we don't have time to discuss now. Nacha Brahmani Maya Shabda Anubhavattihi. So he says, if there is a criticism that, and Bhashyakara actually, not Bhashyakara, actually the opponent of Vrittigara. So you find in the early part of Bhashya, this exchange of ideas between Vrittigara, who was also Vedantin, was a great Vedantin, and also those who opposed to him. Those who opposed to him will sometimes tell you, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya. All these koshas can be interpreted in Vikarartha. Mayat Pratyaya can be in Vikarartha. But Vrittigara tells you that Anandamaya is in Prachuryartha. These two meanings are fully accepted in Vyakarana. Vikarartha is accepted. Vikara means modification. And Prachurya means abundance. That is Sagala Guna Kalyana Niti of Ramanuja. So, Nacha Brahmani Maya Shabda Anubhavati. There is no, it can't say that Maya Pratyaya is Anubhavana, means untenable, logically not defensible with regard to Brahman. Prachuryartha to Sambhavad. It's always possible to interpret Maya Pratyaya because you are well accepted in Vyakarana, according to Vyakarana Shastram. The Priyadhyavayava api Priyadarshana the Upadhya Dikrita Bhavishyanti. That is Priyadhyava you mentioned in here, Tasya Priyameva Siddha Modo Dekshina Pakshaka Pramoduktara Pakshaka Ananda Atma. So you cannot say, Priya means joy. So Siraskatva means you cannot say the Brahman, his head is Priya. But you can always say with regard to Saguna Ishvara, because you get Ananda only from somebody who has an abundance of Ananda. That is Sasya Priyameva Siraha, Modo Dekshina Pakshaka, Pramodo Uttara Pakshaka, etc. Ananda Atma, etc. So, Priyadi Avayava api Vishya Darsanadi Ubadhikrita Bhavishyanti. Ubadhikrita means, see, in the other koshas, there are upadhis mentioned. That can be extended here also. Tasmat Paramatma Anandamaya iti Ekadeshinam Matam. This is the traditional Advaitic condensation of Bhaktigara Matam. If you read the book which doesn't contain this clear bifurcation or clear differentiation, what is the view of Bhaktigara and what's the view of those who are opposed to him, and then how Shankara enters the scene, extending the thought process beyond Anandamaya, saying that Brahma Bhashyam Pradishtha is the Adhikarana Vakyam of this Adhikarana. Brahma Bhashyam Pradishtha. The Purvapakshi will tell you the Panchakosha Vivarana he takes up, and he will tell you that, well, all the other koshas are vikaras, modifications of Ananda. So also Anandamaya kosha also can be modification, and then he tell you that those who are opposed to Vrittigara, I will tell you. So Anandamaya is samsari. The Vrittigara rejects that. But Bhashyagara comes, he extends Vrittigara's thought process beyond the Saguna Sagara dimension. Remember, when you talk about Saguna Sakara, which we always kept in mind, that Advaita never rejects Saguna Sakara. People who don't have any access to the original Advaita text, or who have studied only from YouTube alone without a teacher, and also from some non-authentic or inauthentic translations, they will come and tell you Shankaracharya rejected Sopadhiga, Apara Brahman, Ishvara, etc. In fact, I mentioned this earlier, according to some literary critics, the greatest devotional poet, far greater than Kulasegara, Alvar and others, who wrote only Mundamala, the greatest devotional poet in Indian tradition is Shankara. No one wrote all these magnificent poet classics on Shiva, Vishnu, and Shakti, Devi, all you can Kumara, all the the Sadmata Sthabaka and Aditya Ambika and Vishnu Gananatham Makeswaram Panja Yajna Varo Nityam Grihastha Pancha Puji. All the Pancha Devatas are being extolled by Shankara to innumerable stotras. So that's what kept in mind. So remember, Brahma Bhashyam Pradishtha is the Adhisthana Vakyam, the Adhikarana Vakyam. The Adhisthana Vakyam is not wrong. And because when you extend beyond Anandamaya Kosha analysis, then the text comes Brahma Bhashyam Pradishtha. And according to that, Brahman is the Bhashyam Pradishtha, Asraya, Adhisthana of Anandamaya. Anandamaya is not Brahman, rather the Adhishthanam of Anandamaya is Brahman. That's a point to be kept in mind. Now we'll come to subject again. Now we come to the text. So, Anandamaya Abhyasad iti evam ekamabi brahma bekshito badi sambandham nirasto badi sambandham cha upasyatvena kneyetvena cha vedanteshu udishyate. Iti pradashayidam paragrantham arabhyate. The purpose of starting this text. What's the purpose? The same Brahman, the same absolute reality as being expounded in connection with Ubadhi Sambandha and without Ubadhi Sambandha, Parabrahmam and Abarabrahmam. So that could lead to some doubts. Sandihyamanam, Parapara Vishetvena, Sandihyamanam, Vakyagati Paryalavacanaya Nirnayatavyam. Therefore, we have to properly analyze the meaning of or the implication of the Vedanta Vakyas based on Vakyagati, Sadvita Talparilingam. And also in Vedanta, you have to remember, literary interpretation is not always dependable. Because one example is this. If you just take Anandamaya alone, then it is obvious that it is all very Vikarartha only. There is no scope for Maya Pratyaya to be interpreted in Prachuryartha. But Pratyakara brings in that idea, which is perfectly okay. Bhashyakara tells you, but actually, there is no point in suddenly changing, akasmat, suddenly changing his own verse from Vikarartha to Prachuryartha in just one context, that is Anandamaya. So it is not acceptable. So that's why, evam ekamabi brahma bekshito badi sambandham nirasto badi sambandham cha ubasya jnayatvena. Ubasya here means whenever Abarabrahmam or Abarabrahmam or Saguna Brahmam is expounded, it always implies upasyatvam. You have to do upasana, you have to do puja, you have to do dhyanam, etc. And whenever the jnayatvena, nirubadhika is the approach or it is expounded in a nirubadhika way without any conditioning limiting factor, then it is only to be realized, to be understood, and that understanding is final. Example, Tattwamasi Mahavakya. Tattwamasi Mahavakya Tattva Jnanam. It is to be known, lead to Sadhya Mukti. That again should be understood. The Tattwamasi Mahavakyam becomes Jnaya only when you are fully established in sadhana sadhushta sampatti. Otherwise, Sravanam alone cannot produce aparokshanubhuti. So, that is an important point to remember. According to Vivarana school, Sravanam itself will produce aparokshanubhuti. So that is Sabda Parokshawada. Sabda means Sravanam. It happens only when the listener is fully ready to have Sravanam. And that becoming ready or being fit for Sravanam means sadhana sadhushta sampatti. Then Siddhanta Jnanam, that is Sravanam, Mananam, it's all linked to Siddhanta Jnanam, not Tattva Jnanam, but Sravanam could also mean Siddhanta Jnanam. And then Mananam, Nididhyasanam. Such a person, if he listens to Tattwamasi Mahavakya, immediately it becomes Jneyam. Immediately he realizes that. I give the example of Sri Ramakrishna. This is a better example. The moment he listened to Tattwamasi Mahavakya Sravanam, immediately it translated in his mind into Aham Brahmasmi Anubhuti. But that doesn't happen to everyone. So here, Nyayatuna means somebody who is fully established in sadhana, chatushtaya sambatti, sravanam, mananam, and nidhyasanam. For such people, this Tattwamasi Mahavakya immediately becomes Nyaya Vastu. That is an important point, remember. And again, another point is, I mentioned this, Vishayavakya is, Vishayavakya means Adhikarana Vakya, could means Brahma Bhashyam Pradishtha. And then, when you take the Vachyartha, then it could mean Pancha Koshas, Jiva, Ishvara, etc. Or Anandamaya, Saguna Sagara, Ishvara. But through Lakshanikartham means going beyond the Anandamaya interpretation as Ishvara, then you consider the importance of Brahma Bhashyam Pradishtha. Then you realize that Brahman is the Asraya, Adhishthanam of Anandamaya. Anandamaya itself is not Brahman. Anandamaya can be interpreted as a Paramatma. To that extent, Saguna, which is Shankaracharya doesn't reject that, but he says you have to go beyond that. Beyond the Vijnanamaya statement that Anandamaya is beyond Vijnanamaya, is Sarvantara Atma, then it's okay up to that point. The real meaning comes only in the next coming statement, as I mentioned this earlier, that is Brahma Bhashyam Pradishtha. That is so. That's an important point, remember. Okay? Okay, now, I think, yeah. Yaccha Gudi Samanyat iti Achedana Karana Niragarana Muktam Tadabi Vakyantarani Brahma Vishayani Vyachakshanena Brahma Viparita Karana Nishedhena Prapanchiti. It's a statement as to the purpose of this new text. That is, Gadi Samanyat. Gadi Samanyat is a sutra in the Shuddhyadhikaranam. Iti Achedana Karana Niragarana Muktam. So, the ideas among the Pradhana Karanavadinaha, those who argue, Sankhyas, that Pradhanam of Prakriti is Jagat Karanam, that has been rejected based on this particular sutra, Gadi Samanyat. There is a convergence, there is total unity, uniformity with regard to the meaning of all Vedanta Vakyas, which simultaneously point out that Achetanam, Pradhanam is not Jagat Karanam. It has been rejected. Iti Achetana Karana Niragarana Muktam. It's already clearly stated that Achetanam Pradhanam is not Jagat Karanam. Tadabi Vakyantarani Brahma Vishayani Vyajakshanena Brahma Virita Karana Nishedhena Pravanchati. Similarly, the same idea Brahma Sutra continues, because other Vedanta Vakyas also have got Brahman as the central theme. That is Tadabi Vakyantarani. Other Vedanta Vakyas also are Brahma Vishayani. They also agree that Brahman is the ultimate central theme of the Vedanta Vakyas. And when you talk about Jagat Karanatam, it is Saguna Sakara Ishvara. Itava imani bhutani jayandena jatani jivanti. When Srishti is accepted, then the same Nirvadhika Brahman becomes Sopadhika Saguna Sakara Ishvara. When go beyond Srishti Sankalpa, then Srishtutvam is rejected, then it is Parabrahman. This idea behind. Now we have this very important, that is Vayasaka Nyayamala of the great Swamiji, that is Sringeri Shankaracharya. So, Samsari Brahmanandamaya Samsariyam Bhavid Vigararthamaya Shabdat Prayadi Avayoktitaka. So the doubt is, Samsari Jiva or Brahman, what is Anandamaya? Samsari Brahma Anandamaya. Samsari Ayam Vidya. So, according to one school, who are even opposed to Vrittigara, samsari jiva is Anandamaya. So you can find a statement comes next, which is Tasma samsari eva Anandamaya atma itevam prapte. That's how the Purvabakshi opposed to Vrittigara concludes his statement, the samsari jiva is Anandamaya. Okay, that's all he began. So this should be taken as a Purvabaksha and Vrittigara's response to these first 3 lines. Anyangam supradhanam, before that, Abhyaso Vakramadibhyo Brahmanandamayo Bhaved Prajudyartho Mayashabdo Prayadya Sihu Ubadhika. So Avrti means Abhyasa, means repetition, Prarambha, Upakrama. If we consider Upakrama and Abhyasa, then Anandamaya is Brahman. But we remember Saguna Sagara Ishvara is implied here. Maya Pratyaya is Prachuryartho Maya Shabdaha. Maya Shabdaha is Prachuryartha here, according to Vrittigara. According to his Purvabakshi, those who are opposed to Vrittigara, it is Vikarartho Mayat Shabdaha. So according to those who are opposed to Vrittigara, this Anandamaya is Vikarartha. Why? Because Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya. All these 4 koshas are can be interpreted in Vikarartha. Body is a modification of Anna. Prana could be called a modification of body. Mind also is linked to that. So it is possible to interpret these 4 koshas in Vikarartha. But Anandamaya cannot be interpreted as Vikarartha. Because when you imply, when you argue Anandamaya is Vikara, modification, then it cannot be Ishvara. Vikara is a modification. Vikara is a karyam. Ishvara is a karanam. So, Anandamaya is the last stage. It is not a karya according to Vrittigara. It is a karanam. It is sarvantara atma. Vijnanamaya sarvantara, I mentioned. It is within, it is different. So that comes in the description, the Bhashya. Prachuryartho maya shabdaha priyadyahasya ubadhiga. So Anandamaya is Paramatma, Ishvara, and there is an abundance of Ananda. Now you may ask the question, what about this Priyadi Avayavaha, it's already mentioned here. Tasya Priyameva Shiraha, Modo Dakshina Pakshaka, etc. Head is, Shira is Moda, means joy. All these are described here, whatever the Avayava. That is Ubadhigara, that is only due to Ubadhis. Just it comes in the context of the other koshas, which are, of course, Vikaras. Now Siddhanta comes. Okay, before that there is another one. Anyangam supradhanam va brahma puchamidi sudam sid anandamesyangam puchengutta prasiddhitaha. So that is the third line, the third sloka. There is a statement there. Brahman is pucha. In that case, this Brahman is an anga. It is a part of something else, or it is itself independent. Anyangam supradhana. Anyanga means anyasya angam. Angam of something else. Something else is angi. Brahman is anga. A pucham is mentioned, a tail, the meaning here. For that, the Siddhanta comes, Langula asambhavadatra puchena adhara lakshana anandamayo jivaha asmin nasidoda pradhanada. That is, in this particular context, this pucham, the word is asangada. Therefore, pucha should be taken as asraya. How? Lakshanigartha. Not vachyartha, but lakshanigartha. Puchena adhara lakshana. Lakshanartha, if you take, pucham is not an anga. Pucham is pradishtha. Brahma, pucham, pradishtha is mentioned here. So Brahman is the pradishtha of Anandamaya. And Brahman is the pradishtha of Saguna, Sakara, Sabhisesha, Sankalpa. That's the meaning here. Therefore, the importance is Brahman only. Anandamaya jivo asmin asidoda pradhanata. This is very important. But now we come to the text. Taitiriyake annamayam, pranamayam, manomayam, vijnanamayam, cha anukramya amnayade. Tasmadva edasmad vijnanamayat anyontara atma anandamayeha, etc. Idi. Atra samsheha. Kimiha anandame sabdena parameva brahma uchyade yat pragutam satyam jnanandam anandam brahma. Idi kimva annamayadivat brahmanaha arthantaramiti. So there is in the Panchakosha Prakarana, Anandamaya is apparently only a kosha. But Bhashyakara will tell you we should not stop there. And Vrittikara also will tell you we should not stop there. Vrittikara extends his interpretation beyond the Panchakosha concept. If you stop with Panchakosha concept as such, then you have to agree with the earlier view, who are even opposed to Vrittikara, who tells you that Anandamaya is samsari jiva. Vrittikara doesn't agree to that. Therefore, Anandamaya, the Anandamaya is actually jiva existing, or rather Anandamaya existing with jiva as upadhi. So, whoever performs upasana, dhyanam, etc., he will realize the supreme truth. So, annamayam, pranamayam, vijnanamayam, cha anukramya. So, one after another, 1, 2, 3, like that is taradamya, he mentioned here. The Amnayad is taught, tasmadva edasmad vijnanamayat anyontara atmanandamayeha, etc. I mentioned this earlier, only, if you look at, you find that is the Atma of Annamaya is Prana, Atma of Pranamaya is Manomaya, Atma of Manomaya is Vijnana, Mukmaya Kosha, and Atma of Vijnanamaya is Anandamaya Kosha. Bhashyakara will explain this later gradually. So, this is mentioned. Tatra samsheka. There is a possibility of doubt. What's the doubt? Whether this jnanam is nischaya or samshaya. So if you go on analyzing this Pancha Mahakosha and finally you come to Anandamaya, whether it is ultimate realization or it is nischaya jnanam or is samshaya jnanam. Therefore samshaya. Kimika Anandamaya sabdena parameva brahma uchyade. Whether Anandamaya here means Parabrahman, yet Pragutam in this context, Satyam, Jnanam, Anandam, Brahma is mentioned here. So one may very well argue that Anandamaya here means Paramatma, Saguna, Paramatma ki Ishvara. Now Vrittikara is slowly building up his argument. Here even Shankaracharya has not entered the scene, Advaitists have not entered the scene. It is only the argument between Vrittikara and those who are opposed to Vrittikara. Vrittikara establishes that Anandamaya is Ishvara, Paramatma. Paramatma is not Brahman, but Ishvara. Saguna, Sagara, Ishvara. I already mentioned here. So, and he supports this view. Satyam, Jnanam, Anandam, Brahma is also mentioned. Kim va Annamaya divat Brahmanaha arthantaram. Or whether this Anandamaya, Anandamaya Kosha is one of the koshas, like Annamaya Adivat, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya. Like that, this Anandamaya is one of the koshas. Brahmana Arthandaram, something else other than Brahman. Kim Tavat Praptam. So what is the most logical conclusion? Where do we stand? What is to be accepted? Brahmanaha Arthandaram Amukhya Atma Anandamaya Syad. Now this is the view of those who are not agreeing with Vrittigara. Brahmanaha Arthandaram. That means Brahmana Arthandaram means, that is, it is something, Brahma Bhinnam means different from Brahman, and also Amukhya. Amukhya means not the real Brahman, but something else, some evolutes. All other things are evolutes, Annamaya Kosha is an evolute of Anna. Pranamaya Kosha is an evolute of, again, it is subtler than Annamaya Kosha. Manomaya Kosha is subtler than, it is Antaradama, means interior and also distinct of Manomaya. And Vijnanamaya is the inner essence, the Atma of Manomaya. So, is it one of those Amukhya Atma, one of those long list of evolutes? Brahmana Arthandaram Amukhya Anandamaya Syat. So it should be one of those evolutes. Anandamaya also. Kasmad. So why the question is asked? Kasmad. So this question may be raised by somebody who is not agreeing with this primitive view. Annamayadi Amukhya Atma Pravaha Paditattva. That is, Anandamaya Kosha or Anandamaya is mentioned in the long parampara, the long succession, the long list of all other koshas. Anna, Prana, Mana, Vijnana. In the same list, Anandamaya Kosha comes. So it also should be a secondary, something secondary. I mean, not Brahman, but something else, something inferior. This is one of the koshas. Amukhya Atma, this is one of the Amukhya Atma Pravaha. Pravaha means a long succession, a stream, a flow, a current. It is mentioned as one of the koshas among the Pancha Koshas. The Pancha Kosha Vivarana, the literal translation interpretation is slightly different from the way it is interpreted in the Brahma Sutra, and of course it agrees with the Pancha Kosha long discussion that you find in the Taittiriya Upanishad also. You can, those who are interested, better to keep that an idea of it, So in the Taittiriya, it comes there, Asanneva sabhavadi, asad brahmedi vedachet, Idi mantrodhaharanam upodyadi brahma bhuchyam pradishta ityabicha anubhavannam pradak brahmanaha pradishtatvena grahanam tasmat karyapadita eva anandamaya na paratma. So, Anandamaya Kosha is not Brahman. Brahma is Bhuchyam Pradishta. So already mentioned here. Because Bhashyagara in the Taittiriya Bhashya makes a very profound statement. It's not found here, but should be kept in mind when you understand the Bhashya. Ananda idi vidya karmanoko phalam tadvikara anandamayaha. That is the Bhashyagara statement in the Taittiriya Bhashya. Ananda idi vidya karmanoko phalam. Ananda is the phalam, the result of certain upasanas. Vidya and karma. Vidya here means upasana, and there's a ritual practice. That results in ananda. Tad vikara anandamaya, sacha vijnanamayat antaraha upasana. So, anandamaya is the vikara of ananda, which again is a result of Vidya and Karma. Vidya means Upasana. You read a scripture, you read something of Bhashyam, then you perform Upasanas, and Upasanas involve meditation and also some related activities. Therefore, and the Anandamaya such a Vijnanamaya Antaraka. It is within, it is subtler. Because actually Anandamaya is the Atma. Sharira means Atma. Sharira means Sharira Samadhi, Atma here meaning of Vijnanamaya. Yajnadi hetuho Vijnanamayat asya andrattu sutehi. Jnana karmanorhi phalam bhoktrutvad andradamam syad. Jnana karmanoho phalam. The phalam, the result of jnana and karma, it is linked to, it is connected, it stays very close to bhokta. And jiva is the bhokta. So therefore that Anandamaya cannot be Brahman. That is the thesis of Advaitins, so kept in mind. This comes earlier elsewhere also. There are other, Yasaneva Sabhavadi, Yasabrahmedi Vecheda, etc. There are other arguments also. Tasya Priyameva Siddha Modo Dekshina Pakshaga, etc. There also it comes, Tasya Purvasya Manomayasya Atmayasya Sarire Manomaye Bhava Shariraha Kahaya Esha Vijnanamaya Tasmadvad Edasmad Ityuktam. So all these Taittiriya Bhashya statements should be kept in mind to fully understand the implication of the Brahma Sutra statements. So he says, the question is asked, Kasmat. The answer is, Annamaya, the Amukhyatma Pravaha Paditattvad. Anandamaya is mentioned in the same Pravaha, in the same long list, stream, succession of other koshas. So Anandamaya also can be one of the koshas. Of course, here Bhamadikara makes very clear, Gauna Pravaha Vadepi Yujyade Mukhya Vikshanam Mukshatetu Ubhayostulye Prayadishtit Visheshika. The Bhashyagaras and other Tikagaras have gone into elaborate discussions that we are not going to discuss right now. Now another view is here, Pakshantaram. So another view in this connection. Athapi sya sarvantaratvad anandameha amukhya eva atma iti. So in that case, so all these arguments are put forward before Shankaracharya enters the scene. Shankaracharya doesn't appear here at all. He comes only during the Bhashya on the 19th Sutra, Asminnasya tad yogam shasti, etc. And there he makes a point that we will discuss later. So, Athapi, so another possible interpretation, Athapi siyat sarvandratvad anandameha mukhya atma. It is amukhya, but it is sarvandara. It is within all other koshas. But still it is mukhya, that is Anandameha mukhya atma. Actually this is the building up towards the Vrittikara's view. Because this Anandamaya is sarvantara. It is within all other koshas. Pranamaya is within Annamaya, and Manomaya is within Pranamaya, Vijnanamaya is within Manomaya, and Anandamaya is within. So the Atma of the later one, the Atma of the previous one is the later one. Anandamaya is the Atma of Vijnanamaya, and Vijnanamaya is the Atma of Manomaya. Manomaya is the Atma of Pranamaya, and Pranamaya is the Atma of Annamaya. So this is the order, it will be described later. That's why Sya Sarvantaratvad, so Athapi Sarvantaratvad. This Anandamaya is Sarvantara. It is inner, subtle, within all other koshas. Therefore, Mukhya eva Atma. Therefore, it should be Mukhya Atma, not Amukhya. You know, here is a response to the previous statement. Annamayadi Amukhya Atma Pravaha Paditatvad, that mentioned here, the earlier statement. That is a statement coming from Purvapakshin who is opposed to Vrittigara. Vrittigara is trying to lift our discussion further beyond. He says, still, Sarvantaratvad, because this Anandamaya is within all other koshas, Mukhya eva Atma, therefore it should be Mukhya eva Atma. Here Vrittigara says, Nasyad priyadi avayava yoga sharirattu sravanacha. Mukhyasched atma anandamaya syat na priyadi samsparsha syat. So Vrittigara's argument is this. Priyadi avayava yoga, you know, Modo Dakshina Paksha, which mentioned here, Sat Priyameva Siraha, already mentioned here. So these are Priya is mentioned here, and Avayava is mentioned. Priya, the more Priya is mentioned, and also Shira is mentioned. Avayava Yoga. Sravanacha means here it mentioned the Sudhis. Therefore, it cannot be Mukhya. That is the argument from the other side. Mukhyasched Atma Anandamaya Syat na Priyadi Sansparsha Syat. If it is the Mukhya Atma, then Priyadi Samsparsha cannot be there. If Atma is Ishvara, then you cannot define, you cannot limit the Ishvara by bringing this Priya, Avayava, etc. Ihatu tasya priyameva shira ityadi sruyate. Here Sruti Vakya is there, tasya priyameva shiraha, etc. Then shariratvam cha sruyate. That we already discussed. Vrittigara continues. Shariratvam cha sruyate. Tasya eva sharira atmaya purvasya iti. Tasya purvasya vijnanamayasya esha eva sharira atmaya esha purnamaya ityarthaha. Nacha sharirasya sadha priya priya samsparsho varaidum shakyaha. Nacha sasharirasya. Now, if this Anandamaya is interpreted as sasharira, means endowed with body or embodied, something, a state of being embodied. So if you bring in this idea of this, the modo dakshina pakshaka, priyameva shiraha, you are bringing moda, all these qualities, joy, etc. You are bringing shira, all the avayavas, limbs of the body, etc. Then what happens is, then priya samsvarsho varaidum shakyakam. If is Anandamaya, he has got a body, that is, if it is sasharira, then he cannot avoid being connected to priya and apriya. Priya, apriya samsparsha. Pain and pleasure, sukha and dukkha, all these are unavoidable, inescapable if you interpret Anandamaya as sasharira, as being endowed with a body, as being something embodied. Therefore, it is impossible to avoid a connection with priya and apriya. So conclusion comes, tasmat samsari eva anandamaya atma. Therefore, this is the conclusion of the Purvapakshin who is opposed to Vrittigara. Because he concludes that Anandamaya is nothing but samsari jiva who has got plenty of ananda. That's how he interprets. Tasmat, conclusion is, samsari eva anandamaya atma. Itevam prapte, even such a way is being established, idam uchyate. We are going to make this statement. Vrittigara comes. Anandamayo bhyasad para eva atma anandamayo bhavidam arhati. It is para atma, paramatma. Why abhyasad? Kutaha? Vrittigara continues his argument. Kutaha? Why abhyasad? Parasmin evahi atma ananda shabdo bhagurtva abhyasyati. So, in fact, this is repeated again and again. That is that Ananda, that's mentioned here. Rasam khevayam libdhanandi bhavadi, etc. comes here. Ko kheva nyat kapranyad yadesha agasha anando nasyad esha kivi ananda yadi. So Ananda is brought again and again. The same. It is abhyasa, repetition of the same Ananda Shabda. Therefore, this Ananda should be a Paramatma. Anandameha abhyasat para eva atma anandamayo bhavidam arhati. Because that Anandamaya is mentioned again and again. Remember, abhyasa is also one of the Sadvida Talpari Lingas. So when you try to establish the central theme of a text or an adhikaranam, then you can use all these Shadvida Lingas, that is Upakrama, beginning, Upasamkhara, conclusion, Abhyasa, repetition, Apruvada, something unique to that statement, Phalam, what is the Phalam mentioned here? Then Arthavada, what is being mentioned, being extolled, praising, Upavati, the logical style of argument. All this should be considered. Here, it's again and again, it's mentioned here, Bhakrutva Abhyasyati. Anandamaya is repeated in so many different ways, not one way, but so many different ways it is being repeated. Anandamayam prastutya raso vai saha idi taseva rasattam uktva uchyade rasam khevayam libdhanandi bhavadi, etc. So, about this Ananda Shabda, in connection with Ananda Shabda, that means connected to Ananda Shabda, in the context of Ananda Shabda, Bahukritva Abhyasati, Anandamayam Prastutya, Rasovai, so these are mentioned, Rasovai, Saha, etc. Bliss, that Ananda is bliss, Taseva Rasattam Uktva Uchyade, Rasam Kheva Anandam, Rasa Khevayam Labdhva Anandi Bhavadi. After getting this bliss, you also become Anandi. You get Ananda, Adifid Ananda. Kukhiva Ananda Kapranya. Without this rasa, no one can move, no one can live. So Pranya, Yadesha, Agasha. Agasha means Purnata, means completeness, omnipresence, all-pervading nature. That is Purnata. Yadesha, Akasha Anandos Nasyad. Yesha hi Anand. Ananda Yadi. So you can't even live if there was no Ananda here. That's a fact. Human life will be impossible without some kind of Ananda, blissfulness that we associate with what something we do, something we speak, something we act. There's always an element of Ananda, inner blessedness. Not happiness and unhappiness, but some kind of inner fulfillment. That itself is a reflection of this Ananda. That is a fact also. There are other tikas which are mentioned here. We cannot live in this world without deriving some kind of inner blessedness, some kind of fulfillment by what we are doing, by what we are speaking, we are studying this also. May not fully understand, not everyone may be able to understand, but you get the feeling, well, this is something important in our life, a spiritual life. So we get a kind of inner fulfillment. That is rasa, that is bliss. That's mentioned here. That is the spiritual connection. It's not happiness. So in other tikas you mentioned the rasa, this priyam, all these difference is all other kinds of empirical worldly happiness and happiness. They only imply the absence of their opposite. For example, if you are happy in a very worldly sense, You'll soon be unhappy when your happiness comes down. So, the current state of happiness is only a temporary absence of unhappiness. Even if you're happy now, if you're less happy tomorrow, the lesser happiness becomes unhappiness. But rasa or bliss here, priyam, etc., that is a spark of this ananda. That's actually the central theme of Ananda Mimamsa, which comes later, another context referred to. That's why it's mentioned here. Koheva anandat kapranyat yadesha akasha anando nasyat esha hi ananda yadi saisha ananda se mimamsa bhavati. It means evaluation, ananda mimamsa comes the Taittiriya itself. Edam anandamaya matmanam upasam kramadi anandam brahmano vidvana vibheda gudaschana, etc. Ananda brahmedi vyajana, that is Bhrigu. So ananda is the most visible, explicit sign of spiritual progress or our proximity with our spiritual goal. That is the ananda. That is blessedness, or priyam, whatever it is. Iti cha sutyantarecha vijnanam anandam brahma iti brahmani eva ananda sabdo dushtaha. So even ananda sabda is used even in the context of Brahman also. Because we get this rasa, we get blessedness. Without this, no one can breathe, no one can live. So, iti brahmani ananda sabdo dushtaha evam ananda sabdasya bhukritva brahmani abhyasa anandamaya atma brahmedi gamyate. So, this mentioned. Therefore, anandamaya, adi anandamaya is atma, which is Brahman. Here we remember the implication is saguna sagara ishvara is implication here. That's the view of the Murtigaras, whose work Kritagodi is supposed to be the original source of Ramanuja's own Sri Bhashyam. Yattu uktam annamayadi amukhyatma pravaha paditatvad anandamayasya amukhyattamidi. Now here, Murtigara is defending his view against his opponent, who went and argued that Anandamaya is samsari jiva. So Murtigara's view is far above the view of his opponent. So he is now refuting the view you already mentioned here. That comes, Annamayadi amukhyatma pravaha padidatva. This statement earlier. Why Anandamaya should be treated as one of the vikar, one of the evolutes? Because it is mentioned in the context of Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, etc. So Anandamaya cannot be something different from the whole list. It's a pravaha, it is a stream, a continuous stream, the flow. And also there is an old principle according to Vaidya Vyakaranam, according to Durgacharya's commentary on Niruktam. He says, Prakarana Vaividyam and Pravaktuhu Vaividyam. So Prakarana Vaividyam means, see, Prakarana Vaividyad Pravaktuhu Vaividyar Asya Arthasya Annena Bhavitavyam. This statement means the meaning or implication of a word should be decided, judged, based on the context in which the word is used and also the person who uses that word, Pravakta and Prakaranam. Prakaranam is the context. In the Taittiriya, you find Anandamaya comes in the context of other koshas, panchakoshas, the fifth one. So, you mentioned Annamaya kosha, Pranamaya kosha, Manomaya kosha, Vijnanamaya kosha, then Anandamaya kosha. So how can this Anandamaya kosha be totally different from other koshas? So that's why the opponent of Vrittigara, the opposed to Vrittigara said, Annamayadi Amukhyatma Pravaha Paditatva. The same Amukhyatma Parampara, the same succession, that's where Anandamaya comes. So it also should be this Amukhyatma, like Annamaya, etc. That is the statement that the Vrittigara is trying to refute in this state, right now. Yatuktam Annamayadi Amukhyatma Pravaha Paditatvat Anandamayasya Amukhyatvam idi. Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, etc. The Amukhyatma Parampara, that's where Anandamaya is mentioned. Therefore, Anandamaya also should be Amukhya Atma, not Mukhya Atma, not Para Atma. Now, Saudoshaka, Bhuttigara says, Anandamayasya Sarvantaratvad. Anandamaya is not like other koshas, it is Sarvantara, it is the innermost of all other koshas. So it should be different. Anandamaya Sarvantaratvad. Mukhyameva hi Atmanam Upadidikshukhu Shastram Loga Buddhi Manusarat. Here is an important point, that is this very famous statement. The whole dynamics of this Panchakosha Prakaranam is, the Advaitic view is expounded in the coming lines. One. Mukhyameva hi Atmanam Upadidikshukhu Shastram. The Shastram is trying to teach the Mukhya Atma Vastu, the real truth, the highest truth. But then the Shastram, the teacher, the Upanishads have to take into consideration the predicament of those who are not fully ready for the highest instruction. So, Shastram Loka Buddhi Anusarat. It has to come down to the level of common people. It wants to teach the Mukhya Atma Tattvam, but then it won't be understood by everyone. So it comes down to the level of the common people. Loga Buddhim Anusarat. Annamayam Shariram Anatmanam Atyanta Mudhanam Atmatvena Mudhanam Atmatvena Prasiddham Anudya Musha Nishikta Druda Tamradi Pratimavat Tataha Anandaram. That is a statement. Tad Ityevam Purvena Samanam Uttaram Anatmanam Atma iti Grahayat. That's a process. So, when you want to make a statue or something, you first make like copper, let's say. You make copper images, Then what do? You first create a mold, that is Musha Nishiktam. Druda Tamradi, Druda means liquid, molten copper. You pour this molten copper into the mold. Then Tataha Anantaram. One after another you do that. Purvena Samanam Uttaram Anatmanam Atmaidi Grahayat. So first you have to tell people, well, Annamaya Kosha. And then lift above next to Pranamaya Kosha. And then Manomaya Kosha. Then Vijnanamaya Kosha. It's like that. You may have a very huge mold, you pour something, then another one comes, again you put. Finally something is Sarvantara. It is the innermost and also it is subtlest, the essence. So an example is given here, Pradipatti Saugarya Pekshaya. Just for easy comprehension, what do? First you tell somebody, you start with the physical body, Annamaya. Then slowly lift the person to Pranamaya, then to Manomaya, to Vijnanamaya. Just like the same mold in which you pour molten copper. That is Druda Tamradi Pradimavat. So Druda Tamra means the molten copper. Pradimavat Tataha Andaram, Tataha Andaram, Tataha Andaram, Tataha Andaram means it. What happens is, slowly, what do? You Purvena Samanam Uttaram. So each in a way resembles the previous one, but the later one is the Atma, the real essence of the previous one. There is a resemblance, as mentioned, Pranamaya is subtler than Annamaya, and Manomaya is much more subtle than Pranamaya, and Vijnanamaya is much more subtle than Manomaya, and Anandamaya is much more subtle than Vijnanamaya. But there is a similarity, Samanam, Uttaram, Anatmanam. As finally you take the person to the highest level. Pradipatti Saurya Apekshaya, just for easy comprehension. Sarvandaram Mukhyam Anandamayam Atmanam Ubadished Idi Sishtadaram means logically it's better. It is logically more tenable, much more easy to understand. So you take a person, lift a person from gross to subtle, and then subtler and subtler. And this again, there is a well-known Nyaya, maxim is introduced, Arundhati Pradarshana Nyaya, that we discussed Hetu Avachana in the previous sutra, in the Shuddhyadhiranam it comes, and also elsewhere also it comes. Itha Arundhati Darshane Bhakvishu api Tarasu Amukhyasu Arundhadishu Darsidasu Ya Andhya Pradarsyade Sa Mukhaiva Arundhati Bhavati Evam Ikhabi Anandamayase Sarvandatvat Mukhyam Atmatattvam. So Vrittigara is now slowly coming to his final point. First, you tell a person, this is your true nature, Annamaya Kosha. Actually, most people interpret themselves to be Annamaya Kosha only. And if you are maybe a higher level, Pranamaya Kosha. If you are intellectual, if you are a mystic, if you are a philosopher, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha. If you are a scientist, philosopher, mystic, and Anandamaya Kosha. Those who in the blessedness, transcendental bliss that is attached to whatever you do, you get a glimpse of the Ananda that is mentioned earlier, inner fulfillment. But everyone begins with the Annamaya Kosha dimension, physical dimension. So just like Arundhati Darshana, you want to show somebody Arundhati Nakshatra, the star. It's a very small, very faint, not easy to see. In the vast sky, there are so many stars. There's a big star, which is much bigger than Arundhati star. So you show a person, the big star is Arundhati. And then there is another one, somewhat smaller but still quite big, much bigger than the real Arundhati Nakshatra. And then there is another one, still smaller but still bigger. Finally, when you take the person one after another, by slow degrees, you take the person to a very small star, which again not Arundhati, but there is but somewhat bigger, but not as small as the Arundhati, the real Nakshatra. Then you tell him, well, this is not Arundhati, this is the other one. So you have to begin with a big star, Annamaya Kosha. And then somewhat smaller but quite big, Pranamaya Kosha. And then Manamaya Kosha, smaller but still bigger than Arundhati. Then Vijnanamaya, which is certainly bigger than Arundhati but quite small. And then eventually you tell him that's not a real Arundhati, it is something that's really close by. That's why, Sarvantaram Mukhyam Anandamayam Atmanam Upadesha iti. Krishishtadaram. So, Upadidesha iti. This is writing in a very old book, a long line. One word is one word, whole line. So, Upadidesha iti. Srishtadaram. This is logical interpretation. Yatha Arundhati nidarsane Bhakvishu Tarasu Amukhyasu Arundhadishu Darsidasu. So when you are trying to show somebody Arundhati Nakshatra exact location, what do you do? First, huge Tarasu Bahuvajana is used. So many, you have to begin with a huge star. Then smaller like that. Then Andhya, finally, Pradarsyade, you show the person, Andhya Pradarsyade, Sa Mukhyaiva Arundhati Bhavati, that's a real Arundhati Nakshatra. Evam, Ihapi Anandamayasya Sarvantatva Mukhyam Atmatattvam. So Murtigara is trying to establish his view slowly. You have to remember, again, keep in mind, we have not yet reached the concluding part of the Adhyarana. The Adhyarana Vakyam, Vishaya Vakyam of the Adhyarana is Brahma Bhashyam Pradishtha, not Anandamaya Kosha. Because then only you enter Advaita. Okay? Up to this only Vrittigara's world.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Yeah.
Sri Ramakrishna Arpanam.